Welcome to Family Dynamics and Impact of Wealth. In a world where talking about the impact of money is difficult, we share stories and tips for reducing the negative impact that significant wealth can have on our emotions, relationships, and behaviors. Now here's your host, Ginny Galisanow.
Welcome, everyone. Today we have with us Carla von Trapp Hunter. Carla is the great-granddaughter of Baron Captain Georg von Trapp and his second wife, Baroness Maria Augusta von Trapp, whose family story inspired and is portrayed in the world-renowned musical, The Sound of Music. Carla is the granddaughter of Baroness Eleanor von Trapp of the Trapp family singers. Carla is also a member of the Hazzard family of Rhode Island, who are prominent industrialists, philanthropists, and activists. Hi, Carla. Thank you for being with us today and for your willingness to be so vulnerable as to share your story about the impact your family's heritage and legacy has had on your life. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me today, Ginny. It's really a pleasure to be with you.
And for me too. Carla, I remember the first time you called me, and I, like probably most Americans, was kind of in awe of the Von Trapp family name. You have mentioned that it was both a positive and misunderstood experience. What was it like growing up as a part of a family with such a recognizable name?
Well, Ginny, that's a really interesting question. I think overall, it's been a wonderful thing to be associated with such a positive legacy. You know, the Sound of Music movie has touched people all over the world with a message of positivity and optimism and faith and perseverance. And those are all really great things. What's curious, though, as you or myself being an individual as a part of that family, is they sort of, they being the public, sort of thinks they know certain things about who I am and how I show up in the world as an individual. That's a handy thing if it's a positive legacy. I can see how it would be tricky for those that it might not be a positive legacy. But I think there's a little complication too with our family, in that everybody seems to associate the name Von Trapp with The Sound of Music, which isn't maybe an entire reflection of what our family legacy is really about.
I remember one of my first questions to you when I met you was, so are you a singer also? Which is not necessarily true for everybody, right?
That is true. And that is definitely one of the first questions I always get. Most of the family is active and also very artistic, although for understandable reasons, people tend to be a lot more private with their artistic and musical pursuits because there's just a little bit of expectation there.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine an audition if you actually auditioned for a show, how frightening that could be.
Yeah. And I think it was interesting for my family, maybe less so for my generation. My great-grandparents, means my mother's generation maybe experienced this more, where my great-grandparents and my grandparents' generation spent from 1939 to 1956 touring the world as professional musicians. And before that, they'd been a very long-standing, sort of well-known noble family with respectable military contributions and social contributions, as was pretty normative for European nobility. But I think for them, they felt like they'd actually had an accomplishment that required a lot of work and commitment to, being really dedicated to their goal. And it's interesting to have then that be morphed into the pop culture phenomenon that has become The Sound of Music.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So your lineage also includes another highly respected American family. You are also a member of the Rhode Island Hazzard family. What was it like to grow up as a member of this family as well?
Yeah. Well, the Hazard family is also a really long-running family. They were a colonial family that settled in Rhode Island in the very early days, and pretty much ever since have been doing interesting things. And I grew up a few states away, so I would say that didn't affect my day-to-day the way that families might if they lived in the same state where institutions were named after them and things like that. But we did have family reunions every few years, and um, I knew enough about the family to notice, that parks would be named in the state after the family, usually where a piece of land had been donated, or a school, things like that. And when you're a kid and you don't really know how that would come to be, and you notice that people respond to your name a little differently. I don't bear the name Hazard, but at things like reunions where people would, you would notice, oh, you're here for Hazard Days, the family reunion. And um, it's just interesting how you notice how people might treat you a little differently. And not knowing your place in that was often confusing.
I've had some clients talk to me uh, about the first time they entered a building and realized it was named after their dad or their grandfather. And
Mm.
it's been a mixture of pride, thinking, "Oh, that's kind of cool," and it's been and embarrassment. I've had some people say, "Oh, I really didn't want to go to that school because our name is all over that university."
Mhm.
Did you ever experience anything similar to either of those emotions?
Definitely embarrassment. I think, coming from old colonial roots where waspiness and that sort of approach um, to life still prevails, it's considered gauche to talk about money and to talk about one's accomplishments. And you're certainly proud of them, but there's a little bit of a paradox there. And when you're a kid walking into this, or even as a young adult, you recognize the double standard of, wow, that's really important. That's something someone worked hard at, or that's a commendable achievement. But yet you also know that you're not to depend upon it or lean on it. And I myself always recognized, okay, like there's a lot of people around me that have done some pretty amazing things. How do I fit in that? And is that then expected of me?
Mm. That is something that we haven't really discussed, but I'm going to ask you it anyway. The
Mm.
concept of being different, all of a sudden discovering that, I might be a little different than others in the room, or the "are you rich" question that often has come up, to little ones, little folks. How did you deal with that? And well, I should even ask, was it even posed to you at all? And if so, how did you deal with it?
Hmm. I was definitely pretty clumsy about it as a child. And I noticed this. I actually felt very comforted in noticing some of the younger cousins who are of my generation, but, 20 years my junior, they might have said like, oh, well, I'm a Von Trapp, and sort of
Mhm.
declare that within their social group and get that immediate buy-in of like, oh, which one is your grandma? And like, do you sing? And it sort of avoids them having to be known for themselves
Mhm.
and figure out who they are. But then I also have tried on different roles of really avoiding it and trying not to talk about it and almost pretending like it didn't exist. So I would say one of the biggest transitions that came for me in my like adulting process was figuring out and getting really educated on what things were so that I could be informed and wouldn't be blindsided, and that I could use those dialogues as a way of educating people.
Mhm.
It shifted the attention from me where they really weren't asking about me. They were asking about this other thing that's, I'm attached to. But it also helped me find harmony and permission in being not dependent on it or not avoidant of it. I was just like, oh, it's this
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm. Yeah, it is interesting. It's like this thing, but it's still part of me and my it's still
Hmm.
part of me and my heritage. So, in the work I do with families, one of the important tasks is for me to thoughtfully guide the family through a series of exercises and discussions that enable them to better understand and, most importantly, own what it means to grow up as a member of a family where their heritage impacts them every day, kind of like what we've just been talking about. Can you tell me more about how you came to learn about and better understand the scope of your family's respective legacies, and really about both legacies? And did anyone expressly educate you about this, or did you just do it all by yourself?
Mm. Wow. And that certainly harkens me back to some years in my life that were kind of complicated. This all, that process impacted me far more than I probably was willing to admit at that time. I wish I'd had somebody like you, Ginny, who could help steward me through that process. Um, at times, I'm the self uh, identifying genealogist in my family. I really enjoy geeking out about trees and family trees, and doing research into the archives. And in a way, I'm fortunate that there are very extensive archives on all the branches of my family. I think how I got into discovering about them came out of Von Trapp fatigue, if you will. I got really annoyed and sort of burnt out on hearing about the Von Trapp family. And, I live in Vermont. There's a number of family businesses around that bear the family name, that are owned by various groups within the family. And it just felt very burdensome. And so I kind of rebelled from that. I was like, I'm going to go do me for a second. And I thought, oh, I'm going to go explore the other branches and I'm going to find some really normal people. And isn't that going to be comforting? I have normal people. Um, how funny is that to look back on? But what I ended up finding was, wow, the hazards aren't just these people that have reunions every 4 years and, might find themselves visiting towns where there's old buildings that bear their name. They actually were really big contributors to the development of a whole state's economy, and then many other contributions after that. Um, and oh my gosh, that actually was like not the answer I was hoping to find. So I went out during a different channel and I kept finding more information and I kind of got paralyzed with it. I really wish I'd had an older relative, but then even more so, maybe somebody from the outside who was a professional and had worked with other families and could see where I was at in that process and the paralysis, but
Hmm.
then steward me through and help me find ways of developing my human capital, spiritual,
Hmm.
emotional, even just having educational experiences that would have really reinforced me as an individual and helped me feel like really grounded as I kind of figured out my place in all of it.
You're listening to Family Dynamics and Impact of Wealth. For more information, visit our website, dynamicsofamilywealth.com. And now back to the show.
I remember the first time a client came to me and advised me that she was part of a dynasty family. And I remember thinking, wow, people use that phrase. And in a very interesting sort of way, you came from, you're on the Von Trapp side of the family. There was this whole European legacy, European noble legacy in some ways that you come from. And then I had not realized that the Von Trapp family really helped to build um, the commercial or economic industry for Vermont. And then on your mother and father's side of the family, there are the Hazards, who had so much to do with Rhode Island and New Jersey and education. Uh, are you feeling paralyzed as I say that to you?
Now, no. Are you sensing my squirming? No, I guess it never really feels like it fits. You know, you hear about these things, and I do. I'm flushing, and I'm imagining myself in a room with older relatives that would be visibly uncomfortable hearing such things. I think my generation's a little bit better with having cultivated a more robust toolkit. You know, we learn how to communicate our feelings at much a younger age, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really funny because not funny, but it's interesting because I do use that phrase about coming out of the green closet, because we you just raise that nice people don't talk about money. It's just considered impolite. And so if you're never talking about it, how do you deal with these issues? And for that matter, that's one of the primary reasons families come to me. It's to help with the discussion of inheritance, legacy, and the emotional impact of significant wealth, and how that impacts our spirit and our humanity. So I think you've been reflecting back on some of your experiences growing up, but are there like lessons or direct examples of explicit education that you think helped you to become this well-adjusted and self-actualized adult? And for that matter, if you don't even mind throwing in some of the benefits and challenges you encountered during this exploration.
Thank you. Yeah, I think actually I have to really give my parents a huge amount of acknowledgement. My parents divorced when I was quite young, and so I grew up in two different households. But I think without explicitly coordinating, they both felt um, a real desire to try to raise me to be self-sufficient and to be able to be resilient and handle resources. I notice a lot of people of significant wealth, and I was fortunate. I grew up with amazing education and healthy food and travel experiences and things like that. That I think my parents were really focused on enrichment rather than privilege. Both my parents worked very hard, and I think they did a good job of starting me out with things like having an allowance, but that was anchored in responsibility. And then when I got older, you received a little bit of money that you actually had to make last for a whole quarter or a year. And it was a good way to learn budgeting and to learn to save and spend, and that sometimes you have to forego things to have different things at a different point. It also taught me the value of money, how long it can take to accumulate it, how quickly it can go away. And I think those were really good practical lessons. I also was taught how to shop, and maybe the value of buying something that was of better quality once and having it last much longer rather than impulse things that had a short shelf life. But yeah, I think it was really personal lessons of how to find and believe in myself. Like my dad had me hiking all the Adirondack high peaks. There's 46 of them, but really 48 because there was a geological study difference between when they created the group and in actuality. And I'd hiked all those before I was 6 with him, so we got a lot of bonding time on the trail. But you don't always want to keep going as a little kid, and you have to learn how to push yourself, and that it's okay to have things be uncomfortable. It just really good practical experiences.
They did really give you a good grounding, didn't they? I know that one of the challenges that I have encountered with families is that often when the legacy, the primary legacy or their primary wealth was created with a specific individual, it's hard for subsequent generations to be able to step up and be willing to take the kind of risk or even have the type of vision to create the legacy that was originally created. It's quite honestly scary,
Mm.
and not to mention they just have no clue how somebody might have pulled all of that off. But it sounds like your parents did a good job of um, giving you some basic grounding.
Yeah, Jenny, I think you're absolutely right. I think their foundation that they gave me was probably one of the biggest gifts. It was a huge asset, actually. It's one that transcends bank balances and legacy names. And what it taught me is that separate from whatever means you may have, your value and your ability to exist in the world isn't anchored to that.
Mhm.
You may have money that may come and go. You may have a windfall. You may have a dry year, um, however that shakes out. But to know that your identity isn't tethered to that and that you can go out and change your identity as you grow and evolve, those are really powerful things. Because so often people get in the green closet and um, they don't believe in themselves,
Mhm.
and it's hard to find that, I think, as an adult. It's fearful.
Yes, I think it's fearful for anybody, but especially if you come from a legacy that you sometimes feel that you have to live up to because people
Mm.
are putting it upon you, whether you want it or not.
Yeah, there's actually a great anecdote there from the hazard side.
Uh-huh.
My my great grandmother's yeah, great. I get lost in the greats. A relative. I can't remember if it's my great grandmother's oldest sibling or my great great grandmother's oldest sibling, but he um, he was a student and he was assuming the next generational role in the family business, and he also enjoyed his gin. And at the time, he was sent away to a leading psychotherapist who was starting to get more notoriety, Carl Jung, um, to sort of help him sort out his pastime, shall we say. And he came back with what is widely recognized, I guess, as the base of the AA platform.
Mm.
The steps.
Mhm.
Um, some people say he helped found it, and the family sort of disputes that a bit. But I guess when I learned about that, I was like, man, even when they mess up gloriously.
I know. I love it. That's great. Oh,
Mm,
so, one of the joys for me of discovering you was finding a peer in the industry, because you do very similar work that I do. And as you know, this industry is both unique and sometimes misunderstood as to why it's even important. Yet, for those who have similar issues, the services that you and I offer actually go far beyond traditional counseling and traditional life coaching. And in fact, it can be so life changing. And because it's so unique, people often ask me how I fell into this niche of a career. I'd
mm.
like to pose that same question to you. What drew you to this field?
Well, I think it was the stumbles and the path that I took into finding harmony with the legacies and learning how to leverage my respective legacies as tools in my life to help others. And I really wish that, like I said earlier, I'd had somebody like you to help me. And I also recognized a real peace move for me when I went to a conference, like my first conference where I was meeting other next gen kids, and I realized, like, oh my gosh, there's like a club. There are like others that exist out there. And that really that was very comforting. And it also was a safe space to bounce ideas and to help, bridge some of the unique challenges. And I realized after I started consulting in this space, the value of having somebody to support your conventional, attorney, wealth management team, maybe even a therapist. Like, you can have all of those things and still have somebody like you who can kind of help come in and stitch it all together and relate to the very specific needs that show up in your life, whether you're an heir, or just trying to find peace with this legacy that you have. And I think there's an element of having that firsthand experience of understanding what it's like to be someone in those shoes, or to be able to really intuit what that would be like. Those are assets that the attorneys and wealth managers don't necessarily have. They have plenty of other great things in their toolkits, but that's really integral.
That firsthand experience, I think, is so tremendous, and the ability to get together with other people who have experienced it or are going through it all at the same time is invaluable. I often say that I learned more from my clients, although they would say they learn a lot from me too, but I often feel like I'm the one who benefits and grows from talking and working with my clients. You have used a phrase in the past that I really find interesting, and it was, at what pain points or areas do you think are most helpful for you to step in and to be able to help someone going through the process of coming out of that green closet?
Wow, that's a big one. The list is long. I guess why I sort of chuckled. There's so I'm a young adult. I see people around me sort of gearing up for marriage, and even if they don't come from a huge legacy background or what we would think of as a dynastic family, like, they may be individually strong earners and want to navigate how to move into the prenuptial process. And I know you do work on that. And also thinking about the opposite spectrum of life, in the figurative end zone, like, what sort of legacy do you want to leave behind? And maybe you're at a point where you're reflecting and you're trying to pass on that message to people that are in your family, but you don't necessarily know how. And so having somebody come in and create documents and lead you through a thought process that will really help you congeal what those thoughts are and articulate them. That is huge. Also trying to raise children. It's people trying to figure out, okay, like, I've made it this far and now I'm bringing a new life into the world. How do I want to be strategic about that? At what point do I want to have age appropriate conversations about the benefits and responsibilities they may be experiencing in their life as a result of family wealth or opportunities? And really, there's just so many beyond that. They're just like pooling into my thought flow.
It's kind of like, do we have another hour to go, right?
Pretty much. Yes. And I'm sure there's things, that you know of that you've experienced that I haven't as well.
Yeah, it does. It's surprising. It continues to surprise me, the challenges that are really unique to families who grow up with a powerful legacy and heritage behind them. It's hard to live up to that and still find your own identity in that process.
It's true. And what I've found, actually, you asked about the pain point
Yes.
that usually brings people into the fold. Usually it is just that. It's really hard for individuals, even people without means, to say like, oh, I wish this was better, like, or my life is good except this one area. Getting to the point where they actually feel like, oh, I should get help from an outside person. Sometimes that can take longer than might be useful to them. But once they get over that hurdle and reach out and realize, oh, like that was actually not that big of a thing. It wasn't as expensive as it, you might have made up in your head. If I reach out, it's going to cost me a fortune. And, people get such benefit out of that they end up sort of keeping you around and helping with other aspects where maybe there's less of a barrier to entry.
Hmm. So I like to leave everybody with a small or big action step that they can take away and implement on their own. Is there a last word of wisdom you'd like to share?
Jenny, I think it's just so important to find a way to be yourself and to feel good about who you are. We only get one chance here at this whole living experiment, and time is really of the essence. So if something's not feeling right to you, find a mentor, find the support, find somebody to even just feel seen by. But also, if they can help you navigate to a more harmonious place, it's such a worthwhile thing.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you for sharing your wonderful story, for being vulnerable. You have just shared with our listeners big lessons all the way through this interview, and I thank you so much for that.
Thanks so much for having me, Jenny. As always, it was wonderful speaking with you.
Thank you. And for all of our listeners, I look forward to being with you again during our next podcast. Until then.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Family Dynamics and Impact of Wealth. For more information on this podcast or guidance for having more meaningful conversations around inherited or sudden wealth, please visit our website at dynamicsoffamilywealth.com.